Well, I'm so pleased to be here with Dr. Paige Morahan and Reverend Roz Taylor for the inaugural episode of Be Honest Conversations for the Helen Keller Spiritual Life Collaborative. As those who've been following this work, the theme has been about love. It all starts with love and the power of connection, the invitation to a life of unity, equality. And speaking of gender issues, here's my son interrupting my very first broadcast. Could you please go? He's very cute, but you need to go now. Okay. Oh, goodness. That's part of being a woman, right? Part of the challenge of bringing women into the world is all of the things that we hold and carry. But anyway, as I was saying, the collaborative is all about love and unity and this vision of the New Jerusalem, of a transformed world where that would be the case. And we're moving into our season of honesty because to build that transformed world, we have to be honest about what we see and the obstacles that we see in this world that are keeping us from that love and that equality and that unity. We can't just make nice and pretend that it's all going to kind of fall into place. We often have to face difficult things and speak hard truths. Paige, I'm so excited to have you here to speak about gender equity because this has been your journey, your life's path. And not only have you experienced the challenges of being a woman in the world, but then you have brought efforts to bring change for others and not just for yourself. And so I'm just really excited to have you here to tell your story of what has been, what you've experienced, what's happening now, and the work that still lies before us. And I'm excited that we have a co-sponsor for tonight's event with Reverend Roz Taylor, who is bringing this work into the world through her efforts to build Deborah's Tree. And I'd love to have, if you want to take a minute, Roz, to introduce yourself and share a bit about that.
Thanks, Sage. And Paige, it's great to see you here on the screen, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say because I have journeyed with you somewhat in your work. And so Deborah's Tree is my ministry, and our mission is to promote the work of Swedenborgian writers and scholars and clergy and artists. And I was just thinking between the three of us, I think we cover all of those categories. So it feels very fitting for me to be here as a co-sponsor with Deborah's Tree for this conversation today about gender equity. Because in the interest of being honest, there really has not been equity truly in the Swedenborgian and New Church movement in the 250 years or whatever that we've been unpacking Swedenborg. And so much of that, has to do with the culture that we have grown up in and so forth. But it's, to be honest, doesn't feel equal as a woman clergy to be able to really do the work of ministry. And so that is why, I have felt inspired, and the community that is around us with Deborah's Tree, to really promote, lift up the voices of us women.
Thank you. All right, well, let's turn it over to you, Paige. Tell us where you've been and what's brought you here to this moment in this conversation.
There was a pivotal moment that occurred relatively late in my career. I had been a chair for almost 10 years. So that's definitely a leadership position in academic medical centers. So maybe to back up a little bit, I started professional life as a scientist, graduated in chemistry and then got a PhD in microbiology and went up the ranks at a medical school in the Department of Microbiology, and then became a chair in 1982. And so the pivotal moment came 10 years after that, or almost 10 years, so early 90s. And I had taken a leadership program, national leadership program, that is now probably in its 60th year, of the American Council on Education, to see what did I want to do. I'd been a chair for 10 years. Did I want to continue with that, or did I want to do something different? To set the stage for this pivotal moment, it was in the spring when we were having our third session together, and we were meeting with directors of national education associations in DuPont Circle, kind of a famous building there where most of these offices were housed. And there were about 5, we called ourselves ACE fellows, for American Council on Education fellows. We were sitting around a rectangular table facing the director of the organization. He was at the head of the table, opposite head. At the far end, there were myself and a male fellow, Zach Hodges, who kind of anecdote, he went on to become president of Houston Community College Northwest, and he's still president and very active. And there were 2 women on the right, and I think there was maybe another male fellow on the left. So we had our meeting for about an hour. And then at the end of the meeting, as we were leaving, one of the women on the right pulled me aside and said, "Did you notice that every time you spoke or asked a question, the organization executive director directed his answer to Zach and not to you?" And I was sort of dumbfounded. I said, "No, I never noticed." And it took me some musing on that kind of reflection, and I realized how much I had buried into my deep psyche all the tiny microaggressions that I had experienced during my time as a chairwoman in academic medicine. I didn't even know the term microaggressions at the time. And shortly after that pivotal moment, I was given a unique opportunity to start a national leadership program to root women to top positions in academic medical centers. We started out with schools of medicine, but we very quickly broadened to dentistry and then public health and then pharmacy. We never went to nursing because there already were a lot of women in nursing. So this opportunity came, and so I really molded over this opportunity. I was thinking, what did I want to do? Did I want to stay chair or not? I thought if I was ever going to do something about gender disparities that I had personally experienced all my career, now was the time. I had the credibility, so I had to be brave and do it. And so I have to say that all formal education in gender or leadership studies or microaggressions, disparities, all that came after this. So it was really a commitment at that point. I didn't know what I was getting into, but it certainly changed the trajectory of my career. I've been working in a white male-dominated field ever since college. So starting out as a lab tech at Rockefeller then Institute, it was primarily male PhDs and MDs were the head of laboratories. There was one woman who was a co-director of a laboratory I was in. She was one of the very few women. And I didn't, as I said, I didn't realize this is the world I've been in since 1961. I graduated from college. And here are just some examples that you might recognize as occurring today, or you may think never. One, I'd answer the phone myself. I used, we didn't have money for a full-time secretary for our department. Is Dr. Moorhan available? When will he be in? Just the assumption that since I was a woman answering, I wouldn't be the head of the department. So all this kind of, every time it occurs, it made me feel like a stranger in a strange land. Do I really belong here? When I was teaching dental students, learning later that dental students were saying I had a good set of legs, not commenting at all on the microbiology I was teaching. And then there's one episode that I'm sort of proud of, one that I was able to think on my feet quickly enough. Usually I'm not. It was on a cancer center study section. This was on the West Coast. These were in the days when we did like 3-day site visits to where we're going to recommend the cancer center for a grant. And one of the male members there noted that one of the female presenters was really good looking. Didn't talk at all about her science. She was good looking. So that was, as I said, it was one of the few times I was able to speak up, and I said, because the director was a really good looking guy. And so I spoke up and I said, and I noticed that the PI, he really had a good set of buns. And like I said, one of the few times I was able to do something was sort of humorous and and think. And that kind of stopped things. And we went on from there, and we didn't have that much more of that discussion, which could have gone on for a good while. So I mean, those are just 3 examples, and that just microaggressions that occurred. And so I didn't realize until I got into kind of my formal study in this area and realized that I was experiencing death by 1,000 cuts. You know, the exhausting vigilance that's required to maneuver as a woman in a male-dominated field. Often I was the only woman in the room. When I became a department chair in 1982, there were less than 150 women chairs in any departments in all of the departments in all of the medical schools. So that was maybe at the most, 1 per school, and often there was none. And that included all basic and clinical science departments. So as I said, I was often the only woman in the room. So every meeting, and I know that this is the same thing that occurs with people of color and people with other marginalizations. Should I speak up? Will I be heard? Is it worth the energy to kind of go through that choice every time? And sometimes I would speak up, and other times I wouldn't. Every slight, do I address it or do I let it go? I have to admit, at the end of my career, this is now not an academic medicine related organization, one of the head men, white men, when I would come into the office, would pat me on the back and say, "How you doing, little lady?" I was like 20 years older than him and had been every bit as prominent as he had been. So it never ends. So the constant calculation, it's an invisible tax that women pay, along with any other minority. We're not unique, but it is exhausting. So that's kind of on the personal side. I want to lift this up, Sage, and this, I think, gets to structural issues in any organization, whether it's convention church or general church or any church or any organization. The rules and systems were made by men for men, and we're still living under those rules. As an example, it took a woman dean in one of our medical schools to get space for breastfeeding. The male deans before her had never thought it was a priority. An example in my own career, when I retired, I got less benefits than the men who retired because I had worked part-time for the last 10 years of my career. And this, of course, is more common among women who go part-time because of various family reasons. You don't get all the benefits that you should, even though we live longer than men. And of course, promotion criteria, which are still pretty prevalent in academic medicine, values numbers of grants, numbers of papers, numbers of awards over any type of relationship activities and successes that you have, such as mentoring, student advising, being on school committees, even those that are important for getting accreditation. And that's just committee work. Women are good at that, just not viewing it as a skill. So this is kind of women's invisible labor. So those are kind of some examples of microaggressions and structural things. So that's the then. Shall we transition to?
Yeah, just let me share. It's just getting my bearings now after my son interrupting me as we began. It just was such a perfect providential moment to be interrupted by my child as you're getting into all of this. And I just really appreciate you bringing up the lack of prioritization, even of these other committees that we recognize are actually how communities function. It's actually how things get done. And yet the masculine values the kind of the wins or the numbers. And I feel like that's really important. That's something I'm seeing in the work that I'm trying to bring is, yes, we can have lots of great worship services and we can write books, but it's really about the community, and it's about the connections and the relationships that you wouldn't even be doing any of those things without it. So I love the parallels of, as you said, these things apply to any organization.
See, often we don't value those. I do remember when we brought this into the ELAM program at one point, and I forget which global corporation it was, had changed their bonus systems so that they I think had a bonus that was like 2/3 what you did vertically, somebody who was the department you were controlling. But at least 1/3 was what you did across to connect different countries to help facilitate multinational entities. So that's the type of structural change that we need to have happen.
And to value that. And then maybe before we go to, and I know you'll get into this a little bit more, but tell us about ELEM and what that is for listeners who are not aware.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the program that I started in 1985 or 95, excuse me, 95, because we're now coming on 30 years, that this is a program that I co-designed with, of course, a group of people to be a leadership program that, one, roots women, these are mid-career faculty in medical, dental, public health, and NIH and some other government agencies, to leadership positions. That was the role, the one of our measures, if you will. Another is to give them a network where they will have someone they could call for advice, and also to learn about, what's behind the scenes at X school that I may be thinking of moving to. Another building, if you will, an old girls network like the old boys network. And then a third was to help them be successful in their positions, because it's fairly well known that women often had shorter tenures than men in leadership positions. I call it the visibility, I'm blanking on the term right now, but you're highly visible so that any misstep you make is highly visible. So we started out with, I think, 24 fellows. And to show you the change in times, in 1995, 96, when we started, we had one IT assignment to get an email and to get on a listserv. And at the end of that year in May, we had two or three people that had not yet been able to do that because their school, remember, these are medical schools. So these are the schools that generally were ahead in this area, were not able to do that. So just think about what's changed in 30 years in the whole IT area.
Yes, and what we're doing right now. Exactly.
Right.
Amazing.
So so the program was kind of what have we done? What has ELAM achieved? Gender discrimination is, well, overall, this was not just ELAM, but gender discrimination now, I call it's at stage 2.0, in that we don't have the blatant discrimination that we had. It's more underground. And we see that with all the companies with the DEI efforts that jumped on the bandwagon, and then with Trump have jumped off the bandwagon. So we see that it is more underground. They'll jump on it when they think good for them. And medical students in 1986, this is shortly after I became chair, were 32% women. We have been over 50%, these are matriculating medical students, for I think at least 5 to 10 years now. It's now 55%. Okay. So that's a big change. U.S. medical school deans, again in 1986, there were less than 5%. I think there may have been one or two at the time that I became chair, and now it's 29% in 2026. So we're almost a third, not quite. And I think to specifically speak about ELAM, 65% of the current women deans have been through the ELAM class. So we're kind of known as giving people that route.
Made a real impact in this.
Right. 12 of the current public health deans are ELAM alum. 5 of the current dental deans are ELAM alums. And then 6 of the current provost. And we even have 2 university presidents including Rebecca Cunningham, who's the 18th president of the University of Minnesota. So we definitely have helped change the landscape of leadership in academic medicine. So that's kind of the good news.
The good news. Yes, let's stop and celebrate that. That is not a small thing that you've been a part of all of that success.
And just kind of as a cultural shift, again, I told you about an IT shift, a cultural shift. Maybe the third year of ELAM, so this is still in the 90s, we had a panel with 3 women deans, and they all wore pantsuits. And there was a fairly much commotion about that because that was still not common in 1998. So again, think now, it doesn't, we have a woman running for president who's always in pantsuits, So it's so that's another little example of a culture shift. Now, why do I think ELAM has been as successful as it has been? This, and I polled some of my friends who were with me in the early start of ELAM, helping with the program, as well as the current leaders of ELAM. And this was one that I specifically put in when we started, was to have 3 meetings, because I knew that it took me at least 3 meetings to be able to put a face and a name together. Maybe this is part of being an introvert, but that's something that I definitely wanted. And I saw the power of that in the ACE program. So that's one. Another one is that we have small group assignments, so that rotate, so that fellows would get to know many of the people in their cohort, their class. So you didn't stay with the same group necessarily for assignments. However, we also put together we started this in, certainly by the 3rd class, we started what we call learning circles. Or the 1st class, we only had 24 people. So. But then we fairly quickly moved up to 36 and 48 in order to make finances meet. So we started these learning circles, which were groups of about 6 women fellows. And initially we recruited senior people to help, but nowadays they're almost all ELAM alumni. So they've been through the program and they're women leaders. This is to develop a close bond. So there always is someone you feel you can call at 9 o'clock at night and say, this funny thing happened and I'm just not quite sure how to interpret it. And I have to say that many of these groups meet every year. Sometimes they go on a spa vacation together, for a weekend, sometimes a house. So they certainly stay connected online. They'll have meetings, Zoom meetings like we have, like we're doing right now. So that's the whole purpose of that. And they're diverse. We'll try to have dentists mixed with medicine, clinical medicine, basic science, and other. And also, we tried never to have 2 people from the same school because we wanted them to feel free. And we brought that learning circle, by the way. I think it's such an important concept. So it has continued pretty much the same as I think when we designed it. I brought that over to our global program that I started later in 2001, because I think it's just such a powerful mechanism. So that means that you're not going to get completely lost because you have that group. And then another kind of model was network amplification. So you got to meet people in your class, certainly. But then we had projects that we designed that everyone has to do a project. Again, I think we brought this in by the 3rd year of the program, that a fellow co-designs with her dean. And it's generally something bigger than the department or the division. It might be a model that something could be, but the dean is thinking about it as something bigger. So this means that the dean's office gets involved as a co-owner of this. And we feel like that was a very important part of this program. And then the third is recruiting faculty. Initially, we recruited faculty from business schools that I had known, but we really quickly moved to identifying faculty who were in academic medicine somewhere, you know, who were good teachers and also had the credibility and had the passion. Like our finance person, I think she's just recently retired as CEO of Colorado's health system. So, you know, not in medicine. I mean, she's a business person, but she knows the field intimately, and it also is a fantastic teacher. So I think having people like that who can be role models and people who have that kind of credibility, we certainly have people from business schools, but they all model the ethos that we want. Okay. So that's kind of the networking that I talk about, and that we in the last session we bring together alumni from. Of course, they get to know some of the alumni because they're learning group leaders, and they all come in during the first session to get to know them. But they get to know other alumni because we have women deans now want to come back to the forum, which is in the spring, because when we started, we didn't have any, but now they view that as a great time to come back and connect with others. So in other words, you get to meet your class and you get to meet previous fellow classes, and you have these faculty and you've got your dean involved. And we bring the dean in the forum. The deans are always on the stage, some of the deans. So they're co-presenting the projects. And we'll often have a session where they're sharing some wisdom. So they have some skin in the game, if you will, and get to be publicized. So I think that's one real success, is this cohort model. Another one that's related, of course, is the empowerment curriculum. And there are three aspects to that. One I've already mentioned is the intentional recruitment of faculty who have credibility and are good interactive teachers, and have passion for this, but also hard skills and soft skills. So we have a good dose of finance, because women are not thought to know finance as much. And on many of them, it just reinforces what they know, and it kind of gives them the credibility. They've been through ELAM, so now people expect them to know that. But then soft skills. We do various leadership instruments, coaching. I brought in coaching very early to ELAM, because I saw the importance of having executive coaching, where there would be somebody outside your institution who could help you, who understood the system, who could help you navigate. And we did the first big kind of mailing to deans to talk about executive coaching. And now it's often included in packages when they hire chairs or deans. Okay. So I think I've helped change the culture in that way too. And then the third area is getting back to the structural aspects. How do you strategically dismantle the structure and try to move towards more of what we believe in collaborative? And so one thing we do is we do institutional engagement. The application process, the dean has to write a letter and sign in on it. There's the institutional project. There's a forum where the deans come. So we clearly build in their involvement. We, as part of the recruitment, particularly to deans, think of ELAM as your succession planning strategy. And many deans do that. You know, if they know they're going to have a chair coming up, they'll have some people internally who that they want to come to ELAM, so they will be in place to be a good, strong internal candidate. And of course, when they come to the forum, sometimes they want to poach potential ELAM alumni for positions in their schools, and we know that's happened as well. The change management project I've already talked about, that's done with the deans, and it needs to be, we design it so the deans are involved because it's something that's beneficial for the school. It's a trial that they can do. It's like a small project that the fellow can be the person who does the lead, but it potentially could lead to more benefit for the school. For instance, it might be developing a case for a new center that the dean is thinking about, and this then gives all the background research that has to be done as part of that to see if it gets done. And then perhaps the woman would become a leader of that center. So visibility, and then again, on the faculty side, with the coaching, we do include some coaching in the program, limited, but it is there. And there's coaching also from the learning community advisors, gives visibility and support for risk taking. So the visibility, they get visible to their dean, and that always is something that fellows talk about, that they might have felt pretty invisible until after ELAM. And then support for taking risks and getting advice. So that's one part of strategic dismantling, is getting the institution involved. Second is allyship, and there's several aspects of this. One is developing groups of women. There might be a man involved, but we first start with the women to work together. And let me give you a couple of concrete examples of what I mean by this. Here's a common microaggression that occurs. And I'll tell you, I've never gotten a group of women in academic medicine together, any school, any genre. These are deans. Somewhere in the first 15 minutes of discussion this will come up. I put forward this idea and it didn't go anywhere until Joe said it. And then everybody gave Joe credit for my idea. So how do you counter that? You have women agreeing together, if they're going to be in on an important committee, to speak up when one of them speaks up, and then Joe builds on the idea and everyone says, or before even somebody could say it, and then Joe, you'll say, "Oh yeah, Joe, I'm so glad that you are building on Sally's idea. That's a great addition." Okay. So, and then women, longer term would be women gathering together at a school to make sure that women were nominated and were on the list to be running for officers for the practice plan, which is a pretty important financial driver in medical schools. And so to make sure that there were women, so there'd be women likely to be elected. So have either of you had that experience of saying something and having a man take your idea? I mean, it's just one of those microaggressions.
Yeah.
They're totally clueless usually.
I can't think of a specific example, but I've seen it happen, and I love the awareness of it, and I love the politeness with the response. You don't have to become aggressive, but reminding and kind of standing up for each other.
And that's why you need to have another person.
Yeah,
you can't do it yourself if it's happened to you.
That really feels like the takeaway from so much of what you shared is it's building these networks of support and community. And I did have a question when you talked about bringing the deans in. That feels so important to have the institutional backing to be a part of the program. I'm imagining not all deans are supportive of this. Like, what's it been like to get involved in different institutions? Have certain ones said yes?
It took a while initially. Here, ELAM started at a small medical school, Medical College of Pennsylvania, which had been a women's med and then went co-ed in 1969. So we did not initially attract the Penns, University of Penns, but after about 5 years, we began to. And now I would say that 90% of the schools in the U.S. have sent women to our program. And I said there, it's now becoming something that deans think about for succession, but it did take a while. And back to allyship, don't forget men allies. I do think it's important to involve men and having men, and this is the case with the deans, to have them not just nominate, but have them mentor and also sponsor women. Because mentoring and sponsoring is different. Sponsoring, you're saying, I think Sally would be a good person to be head of this new center. Now, if Sally bombs, your reputation is at risk. So that's kind of what sponsorship is about. And part of that's like publicly crediting women's ideas. All of those are structural changes. So those are the good things. Let me go to the sadder things, the backsliding that is occurring. That certainly has affected me. But before I leave this, I do want to say programs like ELAM are not enough. we really have to work on the overall fixing the system. It's not fixing the women, which is what it's so often been viewed as. It's really fixing the system. Just one small example, for instance, I'm not sure this is still the case, but I know in the 90s it certainly was, that there were, in scientific societies, there would be a early research award, clinical or basic science organization, and the cutoff was 35. Now, if you're a woman and you have children, you may well not be at that stage when you're 35. So that immediately cut women out of prestigious awards that would get them ahead for their careers. So that's a structural change. I just said I'm not sure how much it's changed now. Another structural change that took a woman dean to do was we finally, in the 90s, started to have tenure clock delays, because it's tenure up or out in academic medicine, as in many has been in many colleges, universities. So it's 7 years up or out that you have to become an associate professor and tenured by 7 years, or you go elsewhere. And if you're having children during that time, this is in your 30s. So they did start to have tenure clock delays. However, these had to be opted in, women did. And often when they came up for promotion, even though it was like 8 or 9 years, they would still say, why is it taking you this long? So a woman dean was the one that made it mandatory that all faculty who had children were part of this delay the tenure clock, and you had to opt out of it. So that's the type of structural change that we need.
Has that structural change happened everywhere or just in one university?
No, just in one
place. Yeah.
I don't know how far it's spread now, and I haven't followed the literature. But I know that it was a woman dean that did that. So the backsliding, we still have a long way to go. We know now, I've just told you some of the strategies that ELAM has used, and many other women's advancement, NSF Advance Awards have been around for 20 years. If they're probably not in existence right now, but they're for all scientists, not medicine. With them and ELAM and other programs, we've done a lot of research that shows what works. And I've just told you some. Networking, both the soft and hard skills, looking at the structural change to embed the program within the institution. We know research has shown what works. However, there's not been the will to use it in many places. And we see that all over. So, and that's where we get down to, you need both. For sustained way, you need both the systems and the culture to change. And what I'd like to say, again, this is known, but it's not acted upon. There have been numerous research reports in corporate America that have shown that the organizations with gender equity have better patient outcomes, better client outcomes, better financial performance. This is, of course, a big one. More innovation and less groupthink. So there have been numerous reports that show this, but we still don't have women as near at all half of the CEOs of corporate America. So the point is, when we fix the system for women, we create better systems for everyone, including men who want flexible work, men who want to mentor, men who are exhausted by toxic masculinity. There are a lot of them out there. So again, both organizational systems and culture must change. And we're certainly having backsliding from that right now about what is valued. And more bad news, of course, is gender equity is moving backward. ELAM learned this year in May, when we're getting ready to have our 30th anniversary, the same week, we had to announce that we were going co-ed because of the government requirements. State schools could no longer nominate women to attend a women's only program. I'm going to have a meeting with ELAM later this week, and I hope to hear what's happening. I do not know what's happening to the recruitment cycle for this coming year. We did have 3 men in last year. I'm sure they had a unique experience. I look forward to hearing. I think it's tomorrow or Thursday. I talk to Elam and see what's going on. Keep you posted. So another bad news, of course, is that besides just gender equity, the whole idea of intersectionality is being dismantled, and the disproportionate effect on women of color has been profound. Just the last year, women of color and LGBTQ women and women with disabilities faced compounded barriers. Women's federal employment dropped by over 30% for these women versus 12% for all women versus 8% for men. So we're definitely moving back to a white male dominated government. Second, the sector in the federal government has been changed. Housing and urban development, which was 56% women, and education, which was 54% women or minority, both of those have had the deepest cuts. So there's been a specific strategy. It's not hit or miss. It's particularly facing those. Women of color who are mayors have garnered more of the issues with the federal government. So I mentioned to you, Elam, women's health research. That's also, particularly if you work, it's well known, research has very much shown that women of color have worse outcomes with birth and neonatal than do white women, even white women who are in poverty. A Black woman who is a master's in business and has a good position is more likely to have a adverse outcome on pregnancy than is a very poor woman in Appalachia. And I won't go into all of the details for that, but part of it is the long history of this, I say I have to be hypervigilant. Think how much more hypervigilant a Black woman needs to be in this area. And this is a real toll on your whole cardiovascular system. And that's part of what the issue is. And finally, another bad news is, and I think I just really need to bring this out, is violence against women is increasing in the United States. At the same time, homicide rates are declining dramatically across the U.S. No matter what our current administration says. There was a historic 31% increase in homicides in 2020, right with the pandemic. But now we've been seeing a decline since then, and the Council on Criminal Justice calls it a stark collapse in the homicide rate and projects that when the final FBI numbers are in for 2025, likely be the lowest nationally homicide rate since 1900. So no matter what we're hearing from Washington, the homicide rates across the U.S. are declining. However, according to the FBI, domestic homicides more than doubled between 2019 and 2024. The last date the figures were available, and most victims were women. And the U.S. is an outlier in this way. Although gender violence is big across the globe, the U.S. is the most dangerous country for women among the high-income nations when it comes to gun violence. 92% of all women killed with guns in high-income nations were from the United States. And women in the U.S. are 28 times more likely to die by firearm homicide than women in peer nations. So this goes along with our love of guns and domestic violence. And it occurs all over the world, but the U.S. is an outlier among high-income nations. And the challenge intergenerationally is also sobering. One, young women do not think there is a gender issue. And they don't think that because it's hidden. It's gender discrimination 2.0. And they're at the stage now where men really view themselves as father figures, as mentors. My Sally is doing well as an intern. It isn't until Sally gets to be an associate professor and now is viewed as a threat that they really begin to see, I just view myself as a nice woman. Why are my ideas batted down?
Yeah.
Because they don't see themselves as viewed as a threat, but they are.
I definitely relate to that, Paige, as a Gen X woman, that growing up, I just had this indoctrination of you can be whatever you want to be, and so I had a very strong sense of my own power, and I still feel powerful, but as I step into that authority, you recognize how much, okay, yeah, you can be anything you want to be, but you have to live by these rules and these terms and in these structures, and you don't actually have power to change these structures without facing the consequences. That there's a lot that's where the effort lies.
Yeah. So it's like we have to re-educate women every generation. And so we don't get that far ahead because we're always re-educating. And I wrote about this 20 years ago, 15 years ago. And then add to this that there's recent research that shows that young men, what's the generation after Gen X? And Gen Z, I think Gen Zs particularly, they want women to go back to traditional roles.
There's a backlash there. Yeah.
So we definitely have work to do. So what hope do I have in this?
Let's please go there. Yes, please go there to hope.
So I told you that, we know what works, but there's not the will and all this backsliding. So what keeps me going? And the big thing that keeps me going is that small actions do matter. And that I may not see the finish line, but my small actions, I think, will help. So before I go there, kind of as final comment, I do want to give 3 takeaways for immediate action that you can do to help this system. 1, lift up your own visibility. And I think I sent you Sage chapter on graceful self-promotion.
Yes.
Hope that you include it with this video. Because this is a term I coined probably the 3rd to the 5th year of ELAM, because I was dealing with many Asian originating women in ELAM, and they were finding it very difficult to say, I did this. So I coined the term graceful self-promotion, and to view it more as educating. Because really, if you don't tell your department chair that you got a grant, then how can the department chair know to include it in the annual report that gives the department clout? So it really is educating others to make them look good, if you will. So find a way to let others know you have what you've accomplished. And there are graceful ways to do this. I said, look at it more as education than boasting or promotion. It is more education. And there are some tips in that chapter, specific tips that I'll refer people to. And then the parallel, of course, is to lift other women up. And this gets back to the co-conspiratorship, the allyship, where you may form. I could see it being in various convention avenues where you might form something to make sure that women's voices are heard.
I think there's something doing that. I think that's part of what Roz is doing. Yeah. And even more so, the lifting up and celebrating each other's gifts is so important.
Yeah, that's certainly, that's within the women, but I'm saying within, and I think that's very important, and also hidden voices, because I really love that part on Roz's where she picks up one woman to kind of highlight at least once a month or a couple of times a month that, I didn't even know what she had done. So
right. I find that a very big part of what we're doing, really, like you're saying, is the sort of developing that network and visibility for all these women. I'm going back in the past and also, in the present.
Yeah. I think both of those are important.
Yes.
There's one woman, by the way, a physicist, who is making it her life work to find stories about women physicists who've been ignored through the ages. And I was just on a podcast listening to her recently where there was somebody from India who was very, very important in tracking the stars, because you needed to have women to do this, because they were looking at films at these spots on films, which were lights been taken. They had to count them and they had to judge how bright they were. And they recruited women to do this. And one of them became so talented, she was ahead of them all. But when the guy went on to get a major award, she wasn't listed and she wasn't on the first paper until much later in her career. They realized that. So anyway, that's just, I applaud what you're doing, Roz. So I think another, lifting others up, for instance, let me give a personal story. I'm a pretty good writer. And I think part of it was I grew up in a journalism family, and father earned his living by writing. And I was getting upset with helping, these were some Indian women in their writing, and felt like I was always seeing things where wrong words capitalized and just little things that were just annoying me. And I had to talk with one of them. I kind of, maybe my frustration showed. I had to talk with one of them, and she told me, to practice medicine in India, I had to learn 4 languages. And she said writing in science was fairly easy because it's fairly cut and dried. But when I moved to medical education, where there are more social science, more nuances, the writing is a whole different skill level. And ever since then, I felt this is something that I can do because I've had the luxury of growing up in a writing family in English, writing in English, living this for 80 plus years. And this is a gift that I can give people. And I've really turned around. So I think all of us can think about, what are some gifts that we can give others that we don't ever think about, that in India you have to learn 4 languages. By the way, that's a whole other story in my art career, learning about languages. There are 6 languages in India that are among the top 30 now. So it's India's the most populous country now. So I'm getting to, not that I'm getting to know, but I'm getting to know the names of Hindi, Maratha, Telugu, Tamil, and I'm sure I'm missing a Bengali.
I love your honesty that you started out annoyed too, like that was your first reaction, but you got curious about it. And how often have people been just ignored and no steps are taken and we stop there? So it's good self-awareness.
So that's the lifting people up, and then strategic sponsorship. So think about when you can sponsoring a woman. This now goes beyond mentoring. It's like sponsoring them for a position on a prestigious committee and convention or somewhere else. Like I'm thinking somebody took a risk to nominate Bronwyn to be our keynote speaker. So it's that type of thing, to give somebody visibility that way. And by the way, for those who may not know, this year's convention is going to talk about art and spirituality, and the keynote speaker is an artist whom I know well. So think about sponsoring a woman for an high impact role like a keynote, for an award, or stretch assignments to a leadership development program. And all this can fit into succession planning. So small actions count. And I have made a commitment to keep working towards gender equity, even in these uncertain times. My suffragette analogy, which I've said before, I view my work as similar to the suffragettes who worked for the right for women to vote for decades, and most of them did not get to vote themselves. They never lived long enough to see that. But I am convinced that continuing small actions each day will help. And I think this goes along with Helen Keller's wisdom. I long to accomplish a great and noble task, but it is my chief duty to accomplish small tasks as if they were great and noble. So I think that, every time I help somebody with a writing assignment, I think of that. And then what is a world that's possible? And I'll bring up one. It's not a perfect example, but I had the pleasure of visiting Iceland this summer. Have you all been to Iceland? Do go in the summer. It's daylight, like 10 hours, much longer than usual. And although it's cold, it's warmer than it is in the wintertime. Iceland had a day where 80+% of the women did not go to work in the, I think 1968, I think it was. And there's a short movie that's made of it, about an hour-long movie, and I think it's well worth following. I think it's The Day the World Stopped or something. Have you seen it or not? It's well worth looking at. I think for both of you, for Helen Keller and for Deborah's Tree, I think it's worth looking at. And so women at that stage, remember this was the late 60s, women were the major typist in the like in the newspaper and all the offices. Women were the major tellers in the banks. So none of them came to work that day in Iceland. And in fact, on a ship, I think it was the Coast Guard Iceland, the women barricaded themselves in a cabin and didn't go out. So, and they took their children to their husbands' offices and dropped them off. So, you know, I can't imagine it happening in the US, but it happened there. And then that meant it really was a change. They were fighting for equal pay. At that stage was a major one. They had the first woman president at the time of Margaret Thatcher, a single woman mother. So think about that. And now go forward, and they've had reappearances of that day without work, not a full day, but a celebration occasionally about every 5 years since then. So that was, you know, years ago, to remind people. So fast forward to almost today, in the 2000s, they had their first gay woman president. And fast forward to now, I'm visiting in 2026, all the people in the Icelandic cabinet are women. The mayor of Reykjavik is a woman, and the head of police in Reykjavik is a woman. And
Power of solidarity.
right. And but not just the women. They're open. In Reykjavik, there is a street that is, think in the U.S. where the government has said you can't paint rainbows on streets. A main street in Reykjavik, the log street, is rainbow colored. All the stores have signs saying we're LGBTQ friendly. I mean, it's palpable. We were on a cruise around the outer perimeter of Iceland, and so we stopped at many. After Reykjavik, the towns at the most are 10,000 people, and many are just 1,500, 2,000. We stopped at one that was 2,000, and I got to talking to a nurse who's a nurse during the week and is an artist on the weekend, and said that in this town, or I think it was 1,500, they had something like 37 different nationalities. So they're open, and they have 10%, if I believe I'm correct, that 10% of the population now is from Poland, with a strong Polish contingent. And I think many of those may have come over because they were gay. So they're open for trans, they're open for gay. So
Yeah.
it's not perfect. I just read a recent article that they say they have a ways to go. If it weren't so cold and dark, that would be something
You might want to move. Well,
right.
and then that example of lifting up women is actually lifting up everyone. That there's
Mhm.
there's
Yeah.
something about the matriarchal force that is welcoming and is allowing and accepting.
So anyway, those are things that keep me going. Iceland is an example of what can be, although it's still a work in progress. And then the suffragette analogy. So I will keep working at this, and of course working for voters' rights, because I think that's going to be the key to getting this done.
Key to continuing to move forward even in this time of backlash. Wow, Paige, thank you so much for all you've shared. We've had a lot of activity in the chat as you've been speaking. There have been lots of cheering happening and celebration. I wonder if those of you who are in the chat have any particular questions you'd like. We do have about 19 more minutes before we're closing. So if you do have any questions, I'm welcome. I'm happy to pass them on to Paige. And I would just share as those are coming in. I know it's a hard moment right now. There's some backlash. It's also so comforting, I think, for you to be sharing the need for the systemic change. And I think that's where I feel some hope that there is, that, you know, all these women got in, we've been educated, we've come into these positions of power, and it's not that surprising to me that there's a little bit of tension now that we're all here, because the systems aren't working and that there are some forces pushing back. And my calling is to be a part of the force that pushes forward to really, really change these structures from the inside out, to think differently about how we can really all be together in the work of being in the world. So Tara has a question. She's asking, what would you say about what to do when male leadership refers to strong women as the stereotype of that nightmare female boss? Do you have any kind of specific recommendation for someone dealing with that?
That's a challenging one. That's going backward.
Yeah, that's part of what's
we probably wouldn't have that today in academic medicine as overt.
Yes,
as someone saying that out loud.
That's part of what this moment has done, is allowed that to happen again.
So I'm thinking that this is where I probably would try to develop a co-conspiratorship with a male ally and really work with that one to be, when somebody kind of says that, a male talking to them is going to be heard more. And let me give you an example. Early on, we used to have, and we still do have, a dean's meeting at that forum for the deans alone, and we'd have some education for them. And the year I'm thinking about, we had given them examples of letters that deans had written that year for the next year's class. And there were statements in there like, she's a good lady vice chair. She may work too hard, but her husband and children are very supportive, accommodating. Can't even think, but they were just these were in letters of recommendation.
Yeah.
And one of the deans, and so we kind of put it out there, read some, and these were days when we put things on one of those transparencies and then showed stuff. And one of the deans said, I'm not sure. And she has a pleasant smile. And one of the deans, Piper, said, I'm not sure that I'd say that about a man. So, again, it was important, I think, for for a male to say that. And there was one dean there that he had sent people to Elam a number of years, but he was really a curmudgeon. And he was one of the ones saying, I don't see any problem with this. And so I kind of wrote him off and said we probably wouldn't have any more from him again, but we did continue to get Elam fellows. But I had the opportunity to be with him about 5 years later on a breakfast table discussion. And he was so proud of the fact that he had the letters of recommendation for promotion looked at for his committee. He'd had a research study done, and he said, there were differences. And so I think having male, I think in that particular situation, having the male allyship is going to be important.
Yeah. You wish it weren't true, but it's sort of true. I like the kind of practicalness of your approach. You got to be practical with the situations you're dealing with. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And I guess, I don't know if you have any questions, Roz, but this isn't really a question, but it's an observation, as we hold this and as we reflect on, this offering is coming through the Helen Keller Spiritual Life Collaborative, which is a part of the Swedenborgian Church of North America, and is building a lot of bridges between the different branches of the church, particularly the more conservative branch and the general church. And I think it's really interesting that the branch of the church that doesn't ordain women actually has a lot of activity thinking about women's voices and thinking about the differences of women. Whereas in convention, where we do ordain women, we don't really think about it or talk about it. It almost feels like we're kind of the Gen Zers, like, oh, there's no problem. We've been ordaining women since 1970, but 1970 wasn't that long ago, really, in the grand scheme of things. And so I just think.
And the structures have still not changed that much.
Structures haven't really changed that much. Exactly. And just realizing how much of this is, I think about my marriage. My husband is very much not a toxic male, wants to be different. And we recognize in our marriage that some of this stuff is kind of just baked in and that needs to be excavated. So you're really making me think about how, and you even mentioned this, Roz, in the conversation that we've released this morning about the women rabbis getting together and how powerful that is. And I think we have work to do within convention to build more of this allyship and have more of this conversation for the benefit of everyone, not because, not just to benefit women, but to benefit all of us. Wonderful. Well, it's a very interesting moment you're in to be an organization built to support women in the world being forced to be co-ed. I mean, I almost can't even get my head around what that means. It sounds like you're all just trying to get your heads around it, and maybe there's just needs to be a holding pattern until this crazy storm passes. Yeah.
Hopefully I'll find out more on Thursday.
I hope you do. Well, we are so blessed to have you tonight and to hear your story and for all your work that you're doing. And as Helen Keller reminded us, obstacles are just signs to press onward. We will not stop this work. I think you've stirred a lot of possibilities just in our short time here. So thank you so much, Paige. And we have
just keep on taking the small steps.
Keep on taking the small steps, one day at a time. That's all we can do. Very good.
And Paige, that's why I really appreciate your analogy to suffragettes. I never really thought of what we're doing at Deborah's Tree as being sort of suffragette work, because I do believe that in my lifetime I won't get to a place where there really is gender equity throughout the Swedenborgian community. I would like to get to the point where we don't need a Deborah's Tree anymore to promote the work of female women, because it's just happening organically. And I do sometimes feel like we're just women doing our graceful promotion work, and it's not making a difference. But I'm very inspired with your analogy that the effects come on later, maybe than in our lifetime.
But talking about time, when I started the ELAM program, several people remember my saying, and I did say it, that I didn't expect we would need ELAM after 20 years, that our job would be done. And here we are at 30 years, and it's I would say it's needed even more now, or as much as it was needed 30 years ago.
Yes.
Well, I think the truth is, as you do the work, you wade into it and you realize that it goes even deeper and there's even more work to do. And I definitely get the sense that Helen Keller lived 100 years ago and she did her work, and we're continuing, it's time is, anyway, it's just getting started in many ways, and we do need to persist because for the future generations.
Can you give us what's coming up on this series?
Yes. Oh, yes. Thank you for the reminder. The self-promotion. I need to read your chapter because I'm not so good at it. Yes. So we're starting with gender equity, which feels so powerful because I think bringing the feminine back into the sphere of spirituality is just so potent. Next month, we'll be having a talk on anti-racism, Swedenborgian anti-racism then and now. And Sue Dittmeyer will be coming and sharing some of her research that she's done on Black ministers in the Swedenborgian Church. And then speaking about SAR, Swedenborgians in Action Against Racism, the current organization and their work. That'll be April 28th live. And then in May, we'll be having a gathering. I believe the title is LGBTQ Identity, Marriage, Family, Sexuality. There might be one more thing, but that will be the topic. And that'll be a conversation between Reverend Colin Amato of the Rainbow Church, Tira Keel, who is in the process of developing a ministry for LGBTQ youth in Bernathen, and our very own Alex Gayhart of the Helen Keller Collaborative. So that'll be a conversation on the last Tuesday of May. So those are the three that we have this spring, and then there'll be more in the fall after a little summer break.
And remind me of the 5 areas that Helen Keller.
So the primary areas that we have identified is economic justice, which was really number 1 for her. Disability justice, of course, women's rights, gender equity, anti-racism, creation care, environmental justice, and then peace, which all of those are so alive. We've added LGBTQIA because that wasn't an area that was really known in her time. Well, certainly known, but not publicly. And we'll be adding other areas because certainly our spiritual eyes have opened since her time, but we'll definitely focus on those 6 pillars that all of them, she could see with her spiritual eyes that these were veils to the true reality that we're called to live in of equality. So this whole series is about naming those veils and bringing a little more wisdom to them so that we can find our way through to what's on the other side. Yes. So these conversations will be live, and then they'll also be released as a podcast next Tuesday, so you can listen in after the fact. So thank you for that little education on self-promotion. Thank you, Paige Morahan. Thank you, Roz Taylor, and thank you everyone for joining us in the background. And we'll do this again next month.
And remember to self-promote in a graceful way yourself and another woman.
Yes. Amen. Will do.
To be intimate.